Hi, my name is Michael Moats. I'm a professor of metallurgical engineering and the department chair of material science and engineering at Missouri University of Science and Technology.
Michael, good to see you, and thanks for joining us. We're gonna pick your brains today a little bit. We met at a sort of MetSoc 2-day copper conference last year. Quite enjoyed what you said then, and I'm sort of wanting to help maybe investors understand some of the moving parts in the copper thematic. So let's start off with a simple one. Okay, what's wrong with copper at the moment?
I think what's wrong with copper at the moment is that the Chinese have over invested, built huge amounts of capacity in copper smelting, which is sucking up all of the world's concentrate, or a lot of the world's concentrates, and have put countries and companies that are in the Western world at a significant disadvantage.
Right. Okay. Now, we've got to try and understand some of the important players in here. You've obviously mentioned China as a massive consumer and processor of. Can we look at some of the production issues being faced by ex-China, as it were? You know, I think countries are waking up to this. Critical minerals, this component copper is a big part of that. We believe. Do you think we're going to be short of copper?
So, long term, I mean, it seems that all the projections are we're going to be short for copper. If you look at the IEA or the World Bank analysis, as we go through the energy transition, or we're in the energy transition, the amount of copper that we're going to need for electrification, either for EVs or for the grid as we go to a more distributed power supply, usually the projections are we're going to need 20 to 30% more copper production worldwide than what we would normally increase. So 20, 30% would be about 5 to 6 million tons of refined copper each year. And the question is, where is that going to come from?
Where's it? Well, where do we know where it's going to come from? Because it kind of feels like we're not set up.
Yeah. Well, of course, part of the increase in copper production over the last 2 decades was the increase of copper production out of Chile. As we brought in a lot of new mines in the 1990s, those have started to, the ore grades have declined. The ore grade, I think, in Chile now is slightly below 1%, where it used to be, close to 2%. So we see, I think, from a mining standpoint, we're seeing the explosion of copper developments in the copper belt of Central Africa, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. And of course, that is a geopolitical issue if you are a Western investor, because you get into conflicts and child labor and working with the government and graft and so forth. And so we don't see, the Freeport-McMoRan, did Tinky there, but then because of financial issues or whatever, they've sold that. And so the question is how does the Western play in the DRC if that's the new frontier of copper mining? You see some in Peru, but in kind of the developed country or in North America, in the United States, we have multiple large deposits that could be brought online, but in the United States, we have permitting issues. Like it takes 20, 30 years to permit. The land is on tribal religious lands, or it's at the head of a beautiful salmon stream or, river watershed. And so that becomes an issue of this, in my mind, this tension that we have between we want electrification for the betterment of the world, but then we don't want mines in localized areas because it damages the environment. And so we're very happy to export that issue into areas that have lower standards. And then we get upset when they don't adhere to our standards.
We do rather. It's like not in my backyard, I think it's called, isn't it? NIMBYs. Yes. If we look at, say, let's take the States, because you're in the States, right? And we love a sort of North American perspective on these things. You've got governments talking a good game around electric vehicles and renewables and net zero and all of those wonderful things which deliver a perfect picture. How hard, how easy do they do anything to enable copper production or maybe mining more generally in country? Is it looking like the road ahead is going to be a little bit easier as we as this demand ramps up?
I'll preface that answer by all opinions expressed by me and not my university or any affiliations that I have, because I am a part-time employee of a national laboratory. They pay my university for my time, and so I want to make sure that everyone understands that my opinions are my opinions. The short answer is no. And the issue of the United States is not just that the federal government puts up roadblocks, but it's also you have to get state governments, you have to get local entities, and then once permits are issued, then the lawsuits come, and so for whatever reason, because of the way our law structure is set up in Australia and Canada, which I would think are very similar countries to the United States, you're able to get permitting done in 2 or 3 years in those locales usually. And then the States, 15, 20 years, and it's open-ended. There is no timeline to getting permits of mines. Now, I should always say when we talk about critical minerals, usually the investors are focused on what's in the ground and what is the mine. Really, the mine just makes almost always a mineral concentrate. It's not like copper rolls out the door at the mine site. They're making a powder of minerals. Like, I've separated the chalcopyrite out from, copper mineral. That's the primary copper mineral of the world. That has to go to a smelter. And so, like in the United States, we mine 1.2 million tons of copper, but we only produce 900,000 tons of refined copper. So we export copper to the rest of the world from our mines, and then we import refined copper because the 900,000 isn't enough for our manufacturing sector. So we export minerals, get them refined, and then bring them back in. And so, that's one of the issues when DOE looked at their critical mineral list last year, and copper became a midterm issue down the road that could be near critical, and they're concerned about the copper supply. Opening new mines is not going to solve the problem if I just take the mineral concentrate and ship it to all the smelters that predominantly reside in China.
But it makes it very difficult for government or even institutional money to say, well, let's get ahead of that. Let's start funding the build of these kind of processing facilities in country if they've always been able to solve the problem abroad, right?
Yep.
So why would you?
Well, I think it's always the existing operations are, always trying to look to make incremental investments on technology to make improvements. So the thing that's going on right now in the United States is companies like Jetty Resources that have developed a technology to, use a leaching aid. So something that helps dissolve copper out of the big piles of rock that we have, the heap leaching, and go back through them and maybe extract more copper. So things that were left over from previous processing, can I go back in and reprocess them? So Rio Tinto has their Newton process. BHP has developed some of their own internal stuff. Freeport-McMoRan, I hear, are doing things. So everybody's looking at how do we go back and leach more copper out of the things that are already on the ground. And in that case, if you leach, without going into too much technical details, copper is produced by 2 different methods. And if you put it into a water-based solution at the mine site, then what comes out of the mine is actually refined copper. It's not concentrate that has to go somewhere else to be smelted.
It's kind of interesting. So we looked at some research out of some universities in Chile and on leaching technology advances. And as it stands, they're saying basically they don't really change things much. There's certainly not enough on the economics. So we need more time, do we, to kind of? I mean, you're at the pointy end of the stick when it comes to processing. I mean, what are you seeing that's working for companies? What do how much more time do we need to actually be able to improve the recoveries of all of the copper?
To make a 30% improvement is, the target. If we need 30% improvement, it's going to be really hard to do. The technologies that we have are very mature. So on the leaching side, it's how do you get more out over time? You will eventually ramp up production, or the decline won't be as steep. It'll slow down, like we'll plateau out for a while. And so now we have that extra amount because we were projecting this decline, but I brought in new technology, and now it's up to here. And so the technologies that we're looking at, 18% of the world's copper comes from hydrometallurgy, leaching, solvent extraction. If you can put it into solution, like at the leach stage, we can get it out. The technology downstream is amazing. It's highly mature. Yes, I do research in that area to make incremental improvements, but really it's all about leaching. On the other 70-80%, right, we're seeing work being done on how to get more copper out of recycling, right? The circular economy. And there's work that's being done in the EU, and I'm part of some projects there that how do I put more stuff into the copper stream, right? And still make high purity copper and not infer too much costs. And so that becomes, how do we increase the recycling and recover some of the copper needs that we want by recycling more? Here in the States, we see Aruba's building a large smelter in Georgia. They're going to use kind of standard technology, is my understanding, of just recycling scrap, because there's no secondary smelters or recycling smelters here in the United States. So then on the mine side, like if we're going to the smelters, like that's the other process path, really the innovations is at the mineral processing stage. How are you going to push more tonnage through as the grades drop and make more copper out? So making things bigger is usually the way to do that. And how do you do that as efficiency? And we see that, Sierra Verde in Peru, Freeport-McMoRan has put on these large processing where, they're now, shipping, tens of thousands of tons per day through their processing to get more concentrate to come out. So I think we'll still continue to see technology development by getting bigger, improving the chemistry modestly. But ultimately we need to bring more mines on, or we need to recycle more.
Right. Yeah. Amen to that. So I think we're saying, right, exploration, we need more technology which will help us find more of it, hopefully with the grace to come. We need to mine more of it. We need to improve recoveries at mine site and then post-processing. And then, as you say, recycling, well, who knows what that's really going to add or make a difference for us. So it is a critical mineral. It's a critical metal for sure. Why? And so we're going to bounce around a bit today because it's the first time we've spoken. It's like there's so many areas that are really, really interesting in terms of this copper outlook. It's like, and if we go sort of up the demand end, we know that the demand is there and perhaps supply is going to be lagging. But what's your take? And we're going to go right the way over at the far end of consumer demand. It's like consumers want it, but a lot of the consumers wanting it also don't want mining. Is a kind of very difficult problem to solve. So again, it's from a North American perspective. What are you seeing over there?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing exactly that dichotomy, right? That and actually we're, my university and people at my university are part of funded projects to look at understanding the framing of, okay, the government wants to improve technology to increase critical mineral production. Let's just get away from copper and just say critical minerals. Would you be in favor of this? And it's the framing of, if you do this to say that it's better for the environment, then the population might be in favor of it. If you do this to say, I'm going to make these companies more cost effective and we're going to do jobs, they seem to be less in favor of it. But that's a generic thing, right? I mean, I want to open a mine, which is easy for us to say if, unless it's, I bought this beautiful area in the Ozark Hills with streams that are clear and I can see the brook trout swimming around, and then you're going to tell me you're going to put a mine across the street, right? Well, when I bought my property, I didn't know there was a mine going to go across the street. So I can see the tension, right? We want to do what's good for the environment overall. But I also think we want our creature comforts and we want what's easy for us. And so even in the United States, I think we see here recently in the news that EV adoption is still increasing, but it's not increasing at the rates we expected or the people expected it. And I'll just say anecdotally, I live in a small town of 20,000 people. and I live 160 kilometers from the nearest metropolitan area, which is St. Louis. An EV does not fit my lifestyle, right? I mean, I could use it to go back and forth to work, but if I have to drive it 160 kilometers, do some things in the city and come back, if I want to go to the airport and back, the modern EV does not work without having to plan stops and all these other things. And I think in the United States, the early adopters are there, and now we're seeing, how cheap are the EVs, how reliable are they? We're seeing other things in that, and so I think we're going to see, as we look at investment, right? When you open a mine or you open a smelter, I mean, you're talking typically several billions of dollars. And are you going to make that investment based on a projection by the World Bank on a global scale, opposed to your local area? And when it comes to people, right, we have, in the United States, we have a very wide range of political stance or beliefs about, I mean, let's face it, we still have people in the United States, a good percentage of the people who say climate change is not really a problem. We should burn more fossil fuel.
Well, I've heard and been part of those debates. I mean, I think we in university we've got, a few universities which have weaponized the phrase fossil fuel. Okay, weaponized it. If that appears anywhere, it's a negative thing. There's no discussion. But going further than that, they've also done things like banned oil and gas recruiters from universities, as they have done with tobacco, as they have done with gambling, etc. It's been put into a basket which is never to be spoken of. But I'm interested from your perspective, not necessarily as a North American, but as a professor, or whether it be part-time professor or not, in a university where that it has always traditionally been the home of people who rail against the system, and as they should be allowed to express themselves and combat what they believe to be wrong until they understand it a bit. There's no problem with that, but it's the perhaps for me sort of the lack of research, the lack of explanation, the lack of understanding as to the role of things like what oil and gas has. So we've got various we've got Just Stop Oil here in Europe. They go and destroy things and just stop for sporting events to make a point. Do you think that there's a job to be done earlier in the process by the industry? Sorry, we're wandering off into slightly different area from copper, but it all comes back to the same point, right?
Yeah.
Do you think there's a job to be done within universities? Say, well, let me at least give you the facts, and then you can make your mind up, as opposed to making up the facts and coming to a conclusion, which may not necessarily involve critical thinking.
Well, Matthew, I think that the conversation starts, at least here in the United States, in the junior high. By the time I see students as a college student, they've pretty much made up their mind based on what they've been taught at the elementary school. And you can provide the information about the impact of oil and gas. I mean, one of the things that I find intriguing is we're going to make all these EVs, and most of them are going to be out of aluminum and plastic. And if you don't have oil, you don't have plastic, right? And so where are you going to get the raw materials? And you're saying, well, the oil supply chain is very economic because they use the fractions for everything, right? And so we're not going to make gasoline. Well, what are we going to do with that? And I know there are arguments on either side of that. And to me, the conversation to have with society is, it needs to be done earlier and needs to have that conversation. Now, in disclosure, I work at a university that was at one time called the Missouri School of Mines and Metallurgy. So we on our campus tend to drift towards the side of, extractive industries are a necessary, very vital part of society. We train petroleum engineers, we train mining engineers, we train metallurgical engineers, right? Geologists. It's part of our DNA as a university. And so we tend to be more towards this is absolutely necessary to provide the building blocks of society. And how do we just use this as sustainability as possible, or as good as possible for the society? There's always a downside to anything that you do.
Yeah, it's true. It's necessary evil. It doesn't sound like it should be a good phrase, but maybe it's the most apt. here. If you despise something, it's you
let's
can't live without
copper.
it.
Like, let's go back to copper, right?
Yeah.
So I want the copper because I need it for the EVs and I need it for the energy transition, so I can do the solar panels and I can do the wind energy because that's what I want to do. Well, then the necessary evil means that we need copper mines. And in fact, I have told the metallurgists that I've been training for the last 5 years, every time you hear the word decarbonization, you should smile because they need more metals. Like we now I have job security, and the people I'm training have job security throughout their career because we're going to need to produce all these metals to decarbonize our energy sector. And it's not going to go away in the near term.
Is there any, because again, I refer to you being at the pointy end of the stick in terms of helping companies and solve problems around production and extracting the value, the most amount of metal. Are there any conversations when you're dealing with groups like that or in the room with people like that and saying, well, we're in danger of getting to a point where we're so paralyzed in terms of our ability to actually produce this stuff for us to optimize, that we're going to run out of it?
I really don't think we'll run out. I think if we struggle to produce enough, like all economics, the price will go up, and we'll push the production into areas where it's easier to get, right? Because the hurdles to open a mine or a processing plant are lower. Here in the States and in the companies that I'm familiar with, no, I'm not really worried about the United States not producing a good amount of copper in the rest of my life, because we do have many mines that are already open, and we will maximize those for many years to come. Eventually, they will play out, and the question is what happens then? But do we have enough for the energy transition? And the answer is no. So then, within, again, our country and even with the EU, where's the EU going to get all of their copper? Yes, you can do a circular economy, but unless you're saying, but we need to grow. So you can't go around and around and around and expect it to get bigger. So you're going to have to bring in copper from the rest of the world. And so then do we start partnering up? And we see this maybe in the geopolitical news. I mean, I'm not a geopolitical person, but I can read the news like you can. And it seems like we're starting to partner up, right? And the term is, I guess, friend shoring, right? We're going to go to our friends, and we're going to go to Canada, and we're going to go to Australia, and we're going to go to Chile, and we're going to go to Peru, and we're going to bring copper from those places into our dominions or into our countries or our union, and that's, or the UK, right? I mean, UK, you guys even have a copper smelter, so you're dependent on metal from somewhere, right? And so to me, policy and politics very much will play a role in.
Well, if you look at Chile's National Copper Commission, what are they, Cochilco, I think they're called, they put out a sort of 10-year forecast of a 1.7% annual growth. That's very different from some of the numbers that we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation. Yep. And that's one of the world's largest producers of copper saying that. So that's why I think these conversations are important, because clearly as an investor, I'd be super excited because, as you say, scarcity drives price. And if there's not enough copper for everyone to do everything that they're currently planning to do, the price presumably will go up. So no problem as an investor, but I'm slightly worried more societally that perhaps we're not going to be able to deliver some of the things we think we are, such as this EV revolution delivering entirely on its own, a net zero situation, which is again another discussion. How do you feel about it?
I believe that necessity is the mother of invention. I think that's maybe it's worldwide, but it's definitely, I think, American, that we're going to figure our way out of this. So if the price of copper goes high enough, we'll do things. Some of those things may be substitution, like the things that we're making out of copper right now. Can we substitute? I know in the 1960s there were a time where we started producing aluminum wires for houses, right? We didn't do it well, and people had fires, and then all of a sudden we got rid of them. But you can, wires can be made out of, and piping for houses can be made out of plastic instead of copper. And so do we start using copper just for those things that we absolutely need it for, and we make that substitution in the market based on price? So I'm not as concerned, probably, because I believe that I do believe that people inherently are smart, and they're going to go where they need to go to make money. I think the long-term, like investing in copper supply seems to be a great long-term investment. Of course, anytime you take investment advice from a professor who, chose not to make as much money as living in industry, you should always be careful about that. But it seems like, a long-term investment strategy, copper definitely will go up, but it seems that the marketplace doesn't value metal production, right? What they want is the metal production so that metal production can go into Tesla, right? Tesla, I'm going to value, right? But I'm not going to value the copper mineralization or the lithium-ion battery mineralization or whatever that feeds into Tesla. And I think there's this interesting view of what makes a successful company, and of course, market sentiment drives market price, which leads to investment. So ultimately, do I like the companies that are in that space, the large companies? Yeah, I think there's a good sell there, but it seems like, will the market recognize that? Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, it'd be, yeah. It's kind of it's frustrating because it's been so obvious for such a long time. And if you look at even previous US governments, they maybe it's just too small a sector to get noticed by. If in banking terms, most mining companies are too small. I think there's a handful of companies where regular banks would actually look at, I'm talking about big banks, would actually look to, invest or make capital available. But the sector's just too small to be noticed at the moment. And it feels like the US government's also been lagging somewhat in understanding the importance of this. I mean, you've probably been shouting from the rooftop for a long time because it takes a while to make a discovery and work, go through the phases.
Yeah, Matthew, even there, like Nearstar has announced, right? They have a zinc refinery in Tennessee. They've announced that they could supply 80% of the U.S. gallium and germanium, which the Chinese last year announced that they're gonna put import or export restrictions on. They've announced they need $150 million to build a secondary process to get it. I mean, they already have the plant, they already have the mines, they have everything else. They say they need $150 million to add on to their existing plant to capture this, which is currently not being captured. Why would we not just give them the $150 million? Like, why isn't their banks lined up, or the federal government lined up, right? We have billions of dollars coming out of the IRA and the BIL and all that stuff, the CHIPS Act, all those things that have come out. And yet, and maybe those conversations are being had, that I'm not privy to them, but $150 million, that's what I just said. 80%, because the gallium and germanium markets are really small. We're talking hundreds of tons a year worldwide. But the impact on semiconductor chips, you are not going to reshore all the semiconductor chip manufacturing that we're talking about in the United States if you don't have the raw material supply. And China produces 95% of the world's gallium or something like that. And so, when they say they're not going to send out gallium, that's a huge deal. And so, again, there's this, we can just give them $150 million or, loan it to them or whatever, however we want to do that. Why haven't we done that? And I don't have an answer for that.
No, neither do I. And I'll use this phrase again, which I've said multiple times. It's like, if you combine all of the mining companies in the world, exploration, development, production, Sweden, one company, it's not even 50% of the size of Apple, okay? One technology company. So that's how small the space is, and therefore that's why it doesn't kind of get a look in. It kind of feels like the poor cousin, because all of the, if you look at the IRA stuff, the Inflation Reduction Act funding, it goes downstream.
Yep.
Where the value is created. And I think that's the problem that people perhaps like Tesla have noted, where they kind of looked upstream and took positions in lithium companies. Like Piedmont, and I think we need to see more of that. I'm not sure we will, because there's been so much value destroyed over the several decades that it makes it hard for companies to actually think, well, I'm prepared to take this risk. It'll solve a big problem, but it also potentially could be a big write-off for us. So it's a tough one. It's really tough.
It's a tough one because you're talking, while we're saying that the overall industry is small relative to the international banking, right? it's still going to be billions of dollars of capital investment that you're basing off of economic projections, what you think the price is going to be in the future for a commodity that in some cases can be manipulated by a foreign government. And so what are you going to do? And so I've often in my thought processes, somewhere along the line, the answer to this has to be some sort of policy enacted by allied countries about how we're going to do this. Because, well, I mean, I look at what the Chinese have done in the marketplaces with metals, and this would be the reason not to invest in this area. I mean, I know we're talking to potential investors, and you're saying why you should or shouldn't do. The Chinese have built out and now produce refined metals, over 50% of the world's market in steel and copper and zinc and lead and nickel. And then you go down to the minor tonnages and the percentage might go up. They've been strategic about that. And if they are not building infrastructure, right? We see their real estate market is having issues. Where are all those raw materials going? And are they going to come out of the country? And so, again, I have my own thoughts about that. I'm not a geopolitical expert of China, but I don't know. I just believe that people in power want to stay in power. And so I stay in power by making sure people have jobs. And so I need to have all those plants producing stuff. Otherwise, they don't have jobs. And so where is all that material going to go? And so does that put the rest of the publicly traded companies in the West at a significant disadvantage? And how do we, I hate to use the word protect, but protect the assets that we have in our countries so we're not dependent on, a country that may be an adversary? So, I mean, to me, it's a fascinating conversation to have, over a beverage, but from an investing standpoint, I'm not really sure where it's going to go.
Yes, it's a tough one. We saw this play out in uranium as well. Oh, yeah. 4 years ago, I think there's a couple of U.S. uranium companies, basically made that point, and we're talking quite a defensive, adversarial kind of language. But as it turns out, here we are. That's where we've ended up. Because, the Russia-Ukraine situation exacerbated matters. You got energy issues, you had energy issues all across Europe and globally. I think just the supply chains, it off the back of COVID, it made it very, very difficult. But we've got the House has voted on, and the Senate is going to vote. And in fact, it has actually voted on it now to make sure that Russia and its product is not supplied into the U.S. market. Enriched or otherwise, so you never quite know what's going to happen, and that kind of, I sort of remember went back in my banking days. It's going back, these markets going from this sort of, carrying large inventories to this kind of just in time model, because you could buy your metal wherever you want through metal traders around the world. It was all fine, and I kind of feel it's slightly going back to the old way of perhaps we do need a bit of an inventory and larger stockpiles, and government perhaps needs to kind of step up and play its part in that for sure. But again, we will see how government chooses to play, whether that be in US or Europe, because I think we're in a slightly worse position here in Europe in terms of the number of mines, the type of resources we have, and certainly on the processing front, we've not invested for many, many, many decades. So it's going to be a tougher ask for us, I think.
Well, and I think, Matthew, what you've said is we are here because of multiple decades of decisions. And so while I'm encouraged by the fact that we're having this conversation, right? Because 10 years ago, I would not be talking to somebody in the UK to talk about investors about mineral metal production. The world just didn't care. And I, if I'm a world's expert, people have said, "Oh, you're an expert in such and such." And I used to, flippantly say, "Well, it's because I'm one of 5 people who care." And I think people now care. And so I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. I don't know what the answer will be, but I'm encouraged because I think we have woken up out of our slumber and realized that there's other things involved in just in time and that type of thing. That there's things about supply chain robustness and security, and we understand from a country standpoint there's national securities. And so I do believe that we're going to see over the next decade or two this general, overarching. We need the energy transition for the planet, for our society, for us as humans, and that's going to drive metal production. And we're going to see, because of that, you're going to see metal producing companies, I think, continue to grow and prosper. We're going to see technologies develop, but the industry is pretty conservative, and so it'll take much longer time than normal investor. Like, I think, to me, from an investor standpoint, right? So I'm a Warren Buffett fan. I'll just admit that. Like, I'm going to buy this now because I really believe in this, and I'm going to hold it for 25 years or 20 years. And I think if you're looking for an investment to make money in the next quarter or the next year or the next 5 years even, that you'll find individual pockets where maybe something is oversold or something like that. But I think overall, a buy and hold strategy of high producing, quality companies that are in the metal spaces that you think are most likely to advance seems to me to be a good long-term investment. Buy and hold with the idea that sooner or later the world is going to wake up and realize that this is a good thing, and then the stock price will appreciate while you're living on hopefully some nice little dividends. And so, I that's my view of this from right now. And I often talk about these things, and I can tell you about everything that's wrong and everything that's why we're here. And it sounds as woe is me and dooms us. But the fact that we're having these conversations, governments are having these conversations, I think you're going to see the ship is turning. It's just a large ship, and it'll take a while to get there. But I think we'll eventually get there.
Wise words indeed, Michael. Appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.